Hello, my name is Makeda Mahario, and on today's CNBC special, we are going to be discussing homegrown solutions versus international solutions, and we are going to be speaking specifically with social enterprises. Homegrown social enterprises versus international NGOs. There is studies that show that only 2% of international foreign aid goes to local solutions. The question is, why is that? When research also shows that homegrown social enterprises can be more sustainable, more equitable, and even more efficient. I am speaking with 3 links in the chain today who are going to be giving different perspectives about this to see if this is really the case, what their experience has been, and if so, how can we make a difference? How can we change it? So first up on my left, I have Liana Zabampema. She is country representative of Siegel Family Foundation, and you are going to be representing a funder's perspective today. To her left, we have Linda Kamau, founder and executive director of Akira Chicks. Akira Chicks? Yes. And she is going to be representing our social entrepreneur today. And to the left of her, we have Sandrine Umutoni, who is the DG of Imbuto Foundation. And you are going to be representing, of course, the convener representation. So I want to speak to each of you and get your perspective on this premise. Has this premise been true for the 3 of you? And I'd like to start with Sandrine. Has this been your experience since you've been in your capacity as DG of Imbuto?
Thank you, Makeda. I definitely would agree with that statement. So the foundation has been in activity for the past 18 years now this year, and through the implementation of our different programs in education, health, economic empowerment of women and youth, what we have noticed is that there is always this challenge when we go into the community and try to empower the young people, the women who have really interesting ideas, but sometimes lack that link that basically will help them get to the next level for the implementation of the activities, to see their vision come to life, ultimately for the social transformation of the communities. So it is definitely a reality for most of us working in the field of the NGOs. But at the same time, we also see this as every challenge is also an opportunity to rectify what has been going on wrong. So we see this as a great opportunity to, one, continue the conversation with a partner like Siegel Family Foundation, or people like social entrepreneurs like Linda Kamau, who really keep us pushing every single day to continue finding solutions to this challenge.
Let's move to Liana as a funder. Has that been your experience?
What we're still doing today is really to look at where the resources are not. We look at young African innovators who have initiatives, who are changing how education systems are in Africa, or how West management is not really something that is looked into in Africa. And those are ideas that need to be nurtured, and we provide technical capacity that they need, but also access to all these resources that they wouldn't have access to if it wasn't for a flexible funder, but also connecting with other funders to say, what is it that, what's the best way to provide support to these people who are doing amazing work in their communities. But of course, beyond that, we create a network of other government and policymakers and international NGOs where we say, we've been in this space for a long time. What do we see that is working? What do we see that is not working? And how can we create a space where these people can, these young innovators who are very keen to change and challenge the status quo, if I can say, right, can thrive and really achieve full impact.
Right. Yeah. Before we move on actually to Linda's perspective, I wanted to ask you another question. What do you think needs to happen for some of these social entrepreneurs, homegrown, to actually be getting these funding to be able to scale?
That's a very good question. So I think I'll use an example of one of our partners in Uganda, Fundibot. They are changing how STEM in schools is delivered. Solomon is a person who has lived that broken system, right? He loves sciences, but the way it was so theoretical. He was like, this doesn't make sense. We need to understand how engineering works. We need to create a space where our kids can use what they learn in physics to actually wire up stuff and create irrigation systems and other stuff. So what we do is really going the extra mile and find people like Solomon, somebody who wouldn't have credibility in front of a big funder to say, who are you to actually be starting this initiative? How do you know that it works? So I would say we take the risk, we do that, we take that leap of faith to say, we here, we understand your passion and we want to support you. So what's the best way to do that? And so I would say that's one of the ways that.
So that's how
yes.
handles the situation. You actively search for social entrepreneurs who are homegrown.
Yeah.
But I suppose the question was, and I think I can ask now Linda her perspective, was what do you think would need to happen for these social entrepreneurs to get the kind of credibility that they need to get that funding? And Linda, before you answer that question, tell me what has been your experience?
So I think for me, I believe first of all is that we have solutions to the problems we face, which is the same narrative that we actually preach at Akira Chicks. We believe in a future where women are building technologies that mirror the problems they face back at home, and so, or the communities that they actually live in. And so for me, it's, one of the things that happens is that we believe in ourselves, and so for us to do the kind of work that we do, it's more passion-driven than it is actually it's profit-driven. And so being an entrepreneur who's passion-driven is completely different from a for-profit driven entrepreneur. So half the time you struggle because you're trying to fix a problem, but you have limited resources. And then I feel like most of the times there's spaces that have been created for like fundraising that actually haven't been put out there for us. It's like I usually say they were built for other people, that is not us. And so that's why it's very easy for international organizations to come into our spaces and be able to thrive, because they're coming in with the resources that are needed, because they actually access those spaces. And I'll give an example of the School World Forum. I just attended my first school last month, and it's thanks to Seagull for just opening up those spaces for us. But if I didn't have Seagull to open that door for me, I wouldn't know where to find the people who actually invest in the kind of work that we do. So I think for me, it's like when you look at what could be done is, I think just looking at what Seagull has been trying to do, and especially with the Africa Visionary Fellowship, where you're nurturing and building a lot of like exposing and like more like demolishing those barriers that have been set for us, and exposing us to those spaces, opening up those doors, and just like, because when I look at how I pitch and when I look at how international organization pitches, it's completely different. I mean, I'll pitch, I'm working in Kenya in 14 counties, and someone will say, I'm in 3 continents. They're just in 3 countries.
Right.
Then, so when you have a funder who's funding scale, they're gonna go like, oh, 3 continents? I'm gonna put money in that. But when I say 14 counties, that's meaning like almost close to a half of the counties in Kenya. That's big, that's basically regional, more like countrywide. But when you look at those 2 scenarios, the person will put money into the continent. So just being prepared in how people view and how we pitch to different funders and different donors, I think we need to invest more in that, and just lots of training for like, some of us who are like social entrepreneurs doing our work based on passion and not on the skill that we have or resources that we have. So I think if donors could start investing in like just those kinds of trainings.
Training.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Capacity building.
Exactly.
You know, you said something so straightforward that basically what the problems are, and so you know how to solve them.
Yeah.
Sandrine, as a convener, what efforts are you making to be able to sort of close this gap?
All right. So ultimately at the foundation, I believe, like Linda just explained, one of our biggest strengths is that we are present in the community. We have been working for the past 18 years in all 30 districts of the country, which means that we are really where the action is happening. So we have this advantage that we're able to work closely with the government, work with international organizations, but at the same time being in the community puts us in a situation where we can hear directly from the mother, from the young person, what challenges that they're experiencing. So our role really at the moment is to, one, try to identify the opportunity that's present in the community and try to identify the other person on the other side who's able basically to provide an answer to the challenge that's being experienced. But this being said, and I want to touch on a bit to what Linda was just talking about, another issue that we often encounter when it goes to scalability in our context is that when you have a new idea that you want to bring into the community, sometimes you find that the legal framework is not ready yet for that kind of solution that you want to bring. So our role now as a convener is also to go back to the other partners that we have from government institution to say, how do we advocate for a new legal framework so we can make sure that in the case of a recent social enterprise that we've worked with, Solid Africa, is able to get to the solutions that they want to bring to the country, is to say they've encountering this specific issue related to taxes, for instance. Now, who do we speak to at the other side on the government level to make sure that this is really addressed? So the next social enterprise that will come after this specific case of Solid Africa will actually find an environment that's more friendly and, like, if I can say, more ready basically to welcome this initiative. So I would say that it's definitely always a work in progress. Again, the partnership that we have with Sigo Family Foundation has really allowed us, again, with the flexibility of the partnership that we have with them, is to say we are on the ground, we are seeing the challenge. Do not put us in a strict box that say you have to do it this way. No, we have the flexibility to say this is the issue we have identified, this is how we believe it's going to be, answered, and trust us that we are going to be held accountable for everything that we're going to bring to the community at this point.
So far, we've sort of identified two sides already. We've identified what the problem is, and we've identified some of the solutions that I think you're working on. So you said legal framework, Linda said, some training. And I suppose just to kind of go back a bit, Siegel is working on this. You're actively looking for entrepreneurs to work for, to sort of, well, I don't know if you're training them, but you can let us know that as well. But also let us know, why don't you think more funders are taking that stance?
So we are really ready to learn from others, but also creating this space where we're having these conversations, where, as Linda was saying, we're not just sitting as philanthropists, but also with the doers to say what are the challenges that you have as people who are really implementing, and how can we as philanthropists, as donors, facilitate the work that you do. You understand better than anyone else. You're on the ground, like what Sandrine was saying, you are present with in the community. So we use platforms like Transform Africa, we go to Scholz forums and other spaces where these conversations need to really happen, and frankly, and really look at, how can we do things differently to really see the impact that we want to see happening. So we are convening as well other influencers in this space to have this conversation and definitely implement it as we talk about it.
I think one of the advantages that many of these international NGOs have is that they operate in many different countries around the continent. And a lot of the conversations, since we're talking about being at the conference and different conversations that are happening now, a lot of these conferences right now are talking about integration when it comes to socioeconomic development. So how do you think that all of these efforts that are being made now for integration across the continent is going to affect the way that homegrown social enterprises are going to do their operations?
I can take on that one. So this week we have actually, it was a sort of like entrepreneurship week for us, as we are launching what we call the Social Impact Incubator tonight here in Rwanda. It's a platform, again, that we've created to nurture the potential and the talent that the social entrepreneurs have, and to really open doors so that they have access to resources and networks that they need to grow and to create more impact. So one of the things that we did was really bringing other entrepreneurs from different countries, from Malawi, from Uganda, from Kenya, from Tanzania, here in Rwanda, to really start now what she was saying, sharing, you know, what has been your journey, what are the challenges that you've encountered, and so that those who are still on the way, they learn from them and know what to expect as well, but also creating collaboration and also exploring market expansion. We're talking about those who are in agri-tech, those who are in agribusiness, those who are in technology, and we see lots of similarities. So if there is something that we can scale to Uganda that's being done here in Rwanda, how about we do that? So this is how we see also this interconnectedness, but also creating these platforms where these people can have this conversation and see, oh, so we can come to your country, we can actually borrow your model to. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. If somebody has made it, and if this is something that works in your context, how about you also take it? So this is how we, you know, as we talk about Africa being interconnectedness and trades happening across country, we see this as a potential way to also create those interconnections and trades happening across countries.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Linda, I'd like to hear your take on it, but before you do, Sandrine, I know you're working for Imbuto, which is an initiative of the First Lady. So, of course, there's a lot of exposure there as well. What's your take on the same?
So when it comes to integration on our side, again, because it was actually an initiative that started 18 years ago out of a single project. And out of that one single project looking at the prevention of mother-to-child transmission of the HIV/AIDS virus, we've now grown into an entire foundation that has over 20 programs being implemented, and actually being able, again, because of this exposure that we've been given for the past 18 years, is to create connections beyond the Rwandan borders, beyond the continental frontiers. And the great, what is really impressive about this is, as we're also going into the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, is that it's almost like being in one room and someone opening the door for you and saying, now go and find out what else is happening. And as scary as it can be sometimes, because you may wonder, okay, I've been used to the Rwandan communities, I know how we think, I know where we're trying to go, now open the borders and I now have to do business with, let's say, Tanzania, for instance. Or if we go further north, let's say we want to do business with Sudan, you find that with integration comes also great challenges, because you want to make sure that your population, your young people, in, I guess, the case of Rwanda, where we know the majority of the population is made of young people under the age of 30 years old, you want to make sure that they're ready for this opening of borders, because as much as you want to encourage competition, you want to make sure that they're not going to be swallowed by the competition either. So with this question of integration comes a great, I would say, burden, for lack of a better word, on the part of government institutions, people working in the ecosystem, to make sure that the capacity building of our young people really go along with these integration efforts that are being made. But ultimately, it's I would say integration is a great opportunity to really see beyond what has been happening, and really learn, as Liana, you were just mentioning a few minutes ago, do not reinvent the wheel, but actually learn how to, perfectionner, or how to improve it based on what you have learned, let's say, from Kenya, or if we go to West Africa, what we've learned from Burkina Faso, for instance. So yes, ultimately integration is a great thing, and it's something that we can definitely all learn from, as long as we're ready as well to open up to sometimes bigger and stronger competition.
Right. Linda, what does, the continent being so close to really integrating, what does that sort of mean to you?
I think I always say we are doers most of the times, and so the policy side is usually what is usually our barriers. So integration means, free trade means it makes our work a little easier, because that means we can actually do our work. I usually give an example of Solomon and I will sit, from Fundibots, we'll sit down and quickly draft how we can improve the STEM clubs that we run in Kenya and make them much better, because we want to actually grow more tech talent, more female tech talent for the African continent. And it's just not for Kenya, for the African continent. But we can't do that alone, because there are different programs that each of us actually have are really thriving. We thrive in the training of the youth. He thrives in the training of the young people, of the children and teenagers. So we sit down and we decide, how about we take what Fundibots is doing in Uganda and integrate that in our STEM clubs, because we have the links in Kenya, all the schools. So it's very easy for just take the curriculum and start implementation. And the same thing, he's doing Fundi Girls. So why not take the same model that we're doing in our youth program and try and make sure that Fundi Girls actually is successful. So it's possible. I think the barriers are like on how we operate as, and especially from a policy side, as what has been the problem. So I think for us, an integrated Africa means that we can now focus on what's niche for us. And that means every single country benefits, because we're good and working on the exact same, the one thing that we're good at, rather than trying to do so many things that at the end of it all, you're actually failing in almost everything. Yeah.
Right. You know, I think one of the things that some funders consider is the sustainability of a certain enterprise. So what exactly, and I want to hear from each one of you on this one, what does sustainability mean to you? Let's start with Liana.
Oh wow, those are some of those big terms that funders we use, but they're really, again, mean different things depending on what people are doing. Some of the trends that we see with the young people nowadays is that they really identify themselves more with social enterprises more than NGOs. NGOs are unsexy. They are like, it's considered as charity. So there is that more, I would say, appetite to go towards the business model to address different challenges that communities are facing. So I would say for NGOs, sustainability is a big term. Most of them really still, and I think for a long time will rely on grants. But we see also more initiatives around creating their own income-generating activities as organizations, so that they can depend less. I would say maybe cover 10-20% of their budget. But these are some of the things that they do, and I believe even social enterprises, this is how they start. Social enterprises, we have seen, as we see them growing, in Africa it's still a big issue. Why? Because as they start, they don't have access to patient capital. And so with no patient capital, you cannot build a team, you cannot build systems or processes. And these are things that you need to even start thinking about, how is my business going? So these are the things that we're trying to avail for social enterprises. But as they grow, some of them have business models that are quite strong to actually be sustainable themselves in the next 5-10 years. Sure. But others are still like, it's a new concept as well. It's something that is still very growing, I would say, and that in many countries they're still trying to build policy that's conducive for those social enterprises. And so we hope that as policy comes along to support the social enterprises, then we can now start talking about sustainability and how this is going to happen as they move forward.
Right. Linda, tell me.
Yeah, I think sustainability is that one question that is always in every proposal. And it's usually half the time. I think just being honest is the hardest thing to do, especially for the kind of work that we do, because I always say the reason as to why we do the work that we do is because there's someone who failed. And in most cases, the government failed. Because if I am doing vocational or technical vocational education, it means that specific job wasn't done well by the institutions that were meant supposed to be doing it. So talking about sustainability, I think that when I look at our side, we can't be fully sustainable because we're fixing someone's problem, someone who created a problem. Right. If they fixed it, we wouldn't be even in existence. And so, but I think for me, when I look at sustainability, is just knowing that in case of anything, like God forbid, everybody can give us money, it means our operations won't go down. Yes, we'll be affected, but it doesn't mean we'll shut down and say goodbye, we'll no longer be running Accuratrix. It's hard, and as Liana has said, you just want 10 to 20% that can actually sustain your operational budget. It's not even your programs, but it's more like your operational budget. Right. And then when it comes to even scaling, I mean, I want to grow the organization to a point where we train 100 to 300 students per year. But scale cannot happen with in-earned revenue, because I'm not a for-profit business. I'm not Safaricom who has to report amazing, profits every single year. But I need crowdfunding. I need Seagull and the rest of the donors to inject scale money. So yes, we can get sustainable to run our normal operations and stick to the small, the impact that we're doing could be in a small scale, but if we want to go large scale, then we still need donor money to actually be able to do that, because it's so hard to, I think, move from here to there without exactly capital. Yeah. So for me, I believe I think we should redefine the word sustainability, that we're not going to say forever we'll never get grant funding. It should be, can at least, if anything happens and no one is giving you money, can you still run operations, but from a certain level, a certain limit? So yeah. So
that's what it means for you. I mean, even going back to what Liana says, it does seem a bit confusing when it's like sustainability has so much to do with money and funding, but I won't give you the funding if I don't think that you're sustainable enough, right? It almost goes around in a circle. You know, Liana, you mentioned policy making. Sandrine, what's your meaning of sustainability?
So for us, sustainability, again, because for us, our work is done in the community. We really believe that sustainability comes from community ownership. If you don't have the engagement of the community in whatever initiative that you're putting in place, it will fail. Because again, you don't want to keep injecting money if the person is on the receiving end feeling like they're just there to receive. So I believe community ownership is very important, and it's something that can actually grow exponentially. And with the community ownership and the rest of the ecosystem understanding what's happening at the community level, you can actually even start finding new sources of funding. For instance, if you were used to getting your funding from, let's say, a government institution, you can now tap into the private sector, for instance, because they also understand they are profit driven, and they also want to remain sustainable and continue doing the work that they do in the country. So the moment you start tapping into their activities, and you also show them that they have something to gain from being active in the community, you create a new sense of partnership that is now moving progressively from the traditional transfer, like top-down development, to now bottom-up, if I may say. And again, for us, in terms of sustainability, it also comes down, I believe, ultimately down to the capacity building of people who implement these activities. If I don't know how many minutes I have, but if I can just give the example of early childhood development programs that we have going on at the foundation, the sustainability of it comes from our ability to pass on the knowledge to the community. So parents can now become better caregivers. And by better, I don't mean they love the children better, but I mean they understand a bit more what goes into the cognitive stimulation of the children.
A bit more awareness.
A bit more awareness, and being able to understand also what goes into the health needs of the children as they grow up. So I would say two things: community ownership and ultimately passing on of knowledge.
You've given us a lot to think about. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Today's CNBC Africa special, we discussed homegrown social enterprises versus large international NGOs. And if you want to join in on the conversation, we'd love to hear from you. Go ahead and tag us at CNBC Africa or myself at @contact_Makeda. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.